different. Um, and so we can see how it might not be something that we're hearing of every day, but by it already existing, it right now means that it's unregulated. And we know that people who are grieving are very vulnerable, especially in that initial stage. And that is where AI technology, as clinicians and providers, making sure that it's being used appropriately and assessing how someone's involved and utilizes social media. All right, so which digital behaviors have you observed? The majority of people said posting public grief content. Oh, wait, sorry.
You use the word chatbot. Is there any familiar with a chatbot is? We're talking about a chatbot.
So a chatbot
AI.
is like Chat GPT.
I saw a lot of people said, I'm really good with that.
Right. And it's going to sound like I know what I'm talking about, but the terms I'm using, that is my vocabulary. My partner, my boyfriend, has been talking about AI for years, and I just recently feel like I can keep up with the conversation just in terms of the language. It sounds like a foreign language at times. All right, so the majority of individuals, it was viewing or sharing archived videos, as well as posting public forums. So the majority of us might have seen this. What emotions does that elicit when you see people publicly posting on Facebook or on TikTok?
There's a lot of anger. A lot of people are, it's polarizing for a lot of people because the algorithms usually go to whatever the extreme is, because that's what's called clickbait, or it's like if it bleeds, it leads. It used to be a common term in the media for what was going to make it onto the nightly news. It's the same thing with social media now.
That's what it looks like when we see someone post about their loved one.
Yeah.
It can feel glad that they're reminding me, and it creates space to remember the person and to celebrate their life and to offer empathy when I might not even have remembered on my own.
Yeah.
And I just mentioned today's the 6th-month anniversary of my mom passing, and my dad and I have already posted. And like it's so comforting to do that. It really is.
Absolutely.
Beautiful way. Never really had before.
And I also think about it allows me, the people that I might not interact with every day, but when I do see them, or it reminds me to pick up the phone and call. You know, growing up, I grew up in a small town in Mississippi, and it was very common. You know, we got the newspaper every day. My parents read the obituaries every day, my grandmother as well. You know, she was 90 years old, and she would say, like, some of her most socialization is at the local funeral homes. But that is how she learned of people in her network and community passing away. But nowadays, how many of us read the obituaries? Oh, well, in this room, I do see this room a few more. Right. But I do not. And so posting on platforms and social media, it allows individuals to have access to obituaries. It allows them to know final arrangements. It also allows individuals to, the person posting, it can be a part of their healing process. Because like we said in the beginning, it can feel so lonely.
I was gonna say, I'm noticing that funeral homes are discouraging the paper obituaries now. My own experience, my father passed earlier this year, and they told us, oh, it's too expensive, you don't want to do it anyway. And I'm thinking, well, there's probably a lot of people that are not gonna know that he passed, you know, they're his age and older, because they didn't get the newspaper.
I don't know where it is in your community, but in the world, it's $400 to do it. to post an obituary in the Advocate or the Times Picayune.
And how many of our communities still get a newspaper every day? A print. And so you're right, a lot of funeral homes are going towards, like a digital obituary and having memorial pages that families can access and post.
One of the strangest phenomenons is the fact that someone's individual Facebook or Instagram post doesn't go away when they die. And so I've had friends that have passed away and people still post on their Facebook page all the time, and and legally, I don't think anyone can delete their Facebook page. So we live on in through this virtual platform in this strange way now.
Yes, and that's going to be something we talk about is that consent.
Yeah.
Because again, technology it's one of the fields that the rapid advancement is always outpacing how we safeguard our own information. And so it makes us start to think about like a digital will is a term that came up, and not my legal will in digital form, but a will that lays out what I desire my digital footprint to be. Having platforms like Facebook or Instagram have the safeguards. I do think Facebook has where you can link your account to someone that in the case of your passing, that person can access your account to then delete it or close it. Mm-hmm.
So a spouse can also contact Facebook, and as long as they can show that they really are that person, they will have access to it. But I had a young widow years ago, and there was a family battle, and that Facebook account became like ground zero for them because she wanted to close it because she didn't think it was healthy, but his family wanted to fight her for the rights to his Facebook page. So yes, it is.
And we see this in all advanced care planning, correct? Prior to the death, during, not just wanting to honor the individual's wishes, but also can see that conflict that can arise among family members. And so I do think that we will be moving to a way where we need to be having the conversations as part of the advanced care planning, what individuals do want. Personally, I would want my Facebook deleted. I wish that there was an option where it could create like a Shutterfly legacy book of photos before it is deleted. But then I would want my page deleted. But that is my personal view.
Isn't there a digital graveyard for like Facebook? Doesn't Facebook also offer?
I know it makes
digital
both.
graveyard?
I don't know of a digital graveyard.
That it was something that people could take their Facebook page and send it to a graveyard.
I think it may be able to be archived. I've never heard about, I've never heard about.
It's closed, I mean, it's sealed and then, but it's there. Nobody can add to it or not.
And so thinking about asking individuals, we can think of plenty of ways where technology and media are beneficial. I get so many spam voicemails. And so every once in a while I go into my voicemails and I start deleting all the spam ones. And then I realized that because I've had an iPhone since 2008, I have voicemails that I have saved since then, which means just a handful. But what I realized is that I'm saving them so I had 10 voicemails from my dad, and they all were 4 to 5 seconds long. And they all said, "Give me a call, baby girl, love you." And I realized that when the day comes that he's not able to say that, I do want those 4 seconds. Sure. And I think that will be healing and helpful for me. And so we're going to talk a lot about different AI practices, but what's so important is we recognize, just like grief as a whole, it's the individuality of how we use technology. And like most things, there are extreme versions of AI that can be utilized. But I want us to make sure that we are continuously thinking of the positive ways because technology is here. AI is here. When ChatGPT was blowing up a couple of years ago, it made me feel old because I was like, it should just be banned. It should be blocked. Like it should cost so much that no young person can buy it because it's not helping us learn. And it was actually a 19-year-old, my sister-in-law's sister, who said, well, it just has to be utilized as a tool. Kids and adolescents have to be taught how to use it because you can't get rid of it. I said, okay, because it can be a helpful tool. So then I like really drank the AI Kool-Aid and I'm all for it now. All right. So how do these digital mourning practices affect our grief processing? So the majority said that it can sometimes help, but that it can also prolong grief or complicate acceptance. And I can see how some of the more AI heavy platforms could absolutely prolong or complicate grief. In doing grief work and grief therapy, it's so frequent that in those initial months, we hear those comments of it's just overwhelming. Am I ever going to feel anything better or different? And we, as the clinician, know that that day will come. But if we had a chatbot that was speaking to us in our loved one's voice, or we had uploaded their entire digital footprint, so they responded to the questions I typed, just like they would have. We can see how that can really complicate that initial stage of detaching and kind of accepting that reality.
We've been reading more and more about how social media is increasing our attention spans. We have shorter and shorter attention spans, and it reminds me when we teach about grief, especially with children, how short their attention spans are, and they'll cry, and then all of a sudden you have to go out and play, and then they'll come back and they'll start crying again about the loss or whatever it is, and then they'll run out and they'll go play. And it reminds me, maybe that's what we're doing again. We're going back to more primal experience of grief where we can only experience it for a little while, then do something else and then come back like children in terms of.
Do you think that's a positive? Yeah.
Don't know if that's positive.
In children, we say it is. It's the beautiful part of grieving in children. But for adults, that's a good question, Jamie. All right, so here are the learning objectives. I'm not going to read every one off, but a little what we're going to do is we're going to go over just some digital mourning practices and how we see the use of technology. We're going to apply some traditional grief theories specifically to the digital mourning process. We're going to have a break. We're also going to have a breakout group session. And then I'm going to show you a clip of a podcast at some point so we can hear AI being used and an interaction through two individuals. All right. So I'm going to pull this prompt back up at the end. So if everyone can just remember the prompt because the reflection will come later. But at some point during this presentation, I want you to write a 1-sentence digital tribute for someone you've lost. It can be real or hypothetical, but just 1 sentence. I found this to be extremely challenging. It makes me think of, thank goodness Twitter took away the character max. I'm kidding. I'm not on Twitter. Okay. So one of the themes for today is this new landscape of grief. When someone we love dies, our grief now lives online. It said that 30 million plus Facebook profiles belong to deceased users. Like, that's an astronomical number. And like you were saying, I don't think all 30 million of those have been archived into the graveyard. And so the number of continued posts and continued access to that profile. And I don't know about any of y'all, but I'm sure the younger generations, the day will come where maybe like they don't want their entire Facebook to still be accessed. Some of us might not want all of our Facebooks still accessed. And so we can see how that information, we really kind of lose the right to our own information after we pass. 1 in 5 adults learn of a death via social media. And grieving online, it can really challenge the traditional private mourning. So one question I have for you is, do we view public mourning different when it is someone of prominent status or someone who is famous versus someone who is your old neighbor's wife that you see a post online? Does that use of media or use of social platforms, does it change how you view the loss? I have someone who I've known over the years, does not live in New Orleans, and his mom passed away. It's been about 18 months. And he is a regular Facebook poster. He always was prior. That was really kind of, I could tell, a style of his communications. And his posts were heartbreaking and just full of his grief. And I remember another friend reaching out and essentially saying like how she was uncomfortable by the post or how it felt too personal and too much information. And I think that this is a topic that really can elicit polarizing reactions and responses. But because while it was uncomfortable or too personal for her, it was recognizing that the use of social media is going to be different for each of us. All right, so when we think about digital mourning practices, we can, of course, have memorial pages. We can have tribute hashtags. We see that. We also see live streaming funerals. That really came about during the pandemic and was a wonderful way for individuals to still collectively mourn and have that ritual aspect. We can have digital shrines, have slideshows. I like the idea of playlist. There are individuals who music is such a huge part of their life. And every person who grieves that person will think about that aspect of music. So I love the idea of creating playlists and sharing those. The next one is texting or messaging the deceased. This is something that absolutely exists. I think about work with ALS patients. And so they have voice banks where they record their voice so that when the time comes and they're not able to speak, their computer technology is able to speak in their own voice. It's truly amazing technology. That is the same basis of technology that can be utilized for that voice to talk after someone is deceased. I could plug in my iCloud and an AI could learn how I text, what my vocabulary is, it would know I'm a terrible speller, I don't like punctuation, and I hate group texts. But it could learn all of that in a flash just by providing the data of my language. And so texting and messaging the deceased, I think, can really complicate the grieving process. I can see everyone's face, and it absolutely can.
It reminds me of an article that appeared, within the past 6 or 8 months about this German fellow who's working with an AI company. He has a terminal illness and he's working to develop a digital profile, a digital self, so that when he's gone, his wife and his children can continue to communicate with him. They can continue to converse with him and with the AI with the language models. That digital reproduction of him will be able to have a conversation with the living, speaking from the dead.
And I'm curious, again, I like us to always challenge our initial reactions. Can anyone see how this can be beneficial? Helpful?
He gave the example of, well, if my wife has a problem with the car, she can ask me and I can tell her, well, you have to take it to this garage or to this mechanic. I can give her advice on things that she will be asking me after I'm gone.
And I guess the argument could be you'd have to create that language base, you'd have to input all that information. The AI can't read his mind to know which auto shop that he would recommend. He would have to have already told it. And so
Changed. The auto shop might not be there.
true. Yeah.
So one of our online people said that is wild and seems potentially dangerous.
Absolutely.
I mean, it might provide a space for people to have some conversations that they need to say that they weren't able to.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, forgiveness or just reframing things that they weren't able to, and maybe the closure, I hate that word, but maybe they need it. Might be possible with AI. I don't know.
Yeah.
We won't talk about no trail.
And so here,
Because
because I think if it could be, we can think of situations where maybe that initial, if it's voicing an emotion not said, I think some of the good research that I found in literature about utilizing AI, the more advanced, such as texting or voice, is that it must be very prescribed and very focused on phasing out the use of. Yes.
There's another online, it's the same lady, her name's Miss Debbie. It says, it could be helpful for the one who is going to die to prepare for their passing to give info. But it should be on their timeline of when it has to stop, again, regulation.
Right. And so that is where Cindy or
Something that could be, and there was malintent.
absolutely, because we've already kind of seen, Chat GPT giving mental health advice that's led to people dying by suicide. We've had, and so much speaks to the unregulated side. So can it be created where, I like what Debbie said in the chat on Zoom, because if I am passing and I could leave videos or recordings of myself or my loved ones, whether that's to say what my wishes are, to say what whatever my things might be that I want to leave them. But having the parameters where that cannot be used for anything further, unless I say. So not being able to be used to create AI that is then creating responses, unless it's my true response. But again, these are safeguards that need to be in place, but aren't currently existing.
I wanted to say, just from a personal standpoint, I lost my 17-year-old in March of this year, and just for my own personal journey, there have been so many times where I just desperately needed to hear her. but I can also say now, 7 months later, that I think that having access to that would have been largely detrimental to me personally. So I think that you're right on track with the, having like a very specific time frame. But that's also really hard because everybody experiences very differently, and a time frame for me may be totally off base for the else's time frame. So I don't know, I can feel like it's a slippery slope, and I don't know if that would be a great idea personally.
Yeah.
As much as I wanted that, I don't think it would have been helpful. So I don't know, I think it's different for everybody, and it's very specific, and that's why things like this are very difficult to create or to, to have integrated into anything, because it's so individualized and everybody processes things so differently. So something that may be helpful to me may not be helpful to somebody else.
And it could be that we're evolving to a whole new understanding of self and things like that, so that what we don't feel comfortable with now, in 10 years, people won't have any problem.
But I do think we can see, and speaking to you, like how so much when we think of grief or just mental health in general, it is so individualized, that process. So putting safeguards that limit the time or the utilization. But one thing you said, and I think that we hear this so much in individuals grieving, is I desperately wanted to hear her voice in the beginning then. And I think that's the vulnerable population that AI can potentially really cause harm to, because we can all understand that in that moment if we were able to plug in a credit card and for $4.99 get a texting app. Because again, it is capitalism, so they are charging for these services. We also see a lot of online support groups. I think that this is a really huge benefit when we think about digital mourning. I also think of, I had to delete TikTok. It was really causing me, I was just scrolling. And one night I realized I stayed up too many hours scrolling videos that I did not have any interest in. So I deleted that. But I've come across in my research for this presentation a lot of people utilizing TikTok and like hashtag grief talk. So voicing their grief and processing their loss. This is the same as a journal. It's their version for their followers or whoever it might be who sees it, or they might be doing it just for themselves. I think that video journaling or video blogging can be a really wonderful way when we are grieving as an intervention, mainly because when we hear things in our voice, we process them differently than just the thoughts in our mind. Same with writing them on paper. And so by recording our voice and hearing ourselves in those posts, it can be a healing process. All right. So we are going to run through some theoretical foundations of grief, about 5 different very common theories that you're all familiar with, and how we can see them and see the core principles in the digital mourning. All right, so here's just a list of the ones we're going to go over. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with Freud, of course, as we always do. And so his main view is that he views mourning as the process of withdrawing the emotional energy from the deceased and reinvesting it elsewhere. In digital mourning, we can see this through online memorials, through preserving messages from our loved ones, scrolling through photos that elicit emotional attachment to the deceased. What we start to see is that platforms and social media platforms really become these places for archiving our loss. It allows the bereaved to revisit memories indefinitely, as frequently as possible. How many of us check something on our phone, whether that's our email app, a social media app, a text message app, And how many times a day do you think you do that? A scary, I mean, a ton, you know? It becomes so common we don't realize that we just unlocked our phone to see if we had blank. And so if we had that access, emotional energy, withdraw some of that attachment. We can see some benefits as well as the risks. So benefits are, revisiting that content. It can be utilized through gradual exposure, gently supporting that emotional integration. I think what's so important is we're going to talk about a lot of risks, but it's about how we can educate people so that social media doesn't become a crutch or technology doesn't become a crutch, but can be used as a tool. All right, so Bowlby, so attachment theory with attachment and loss, the core idea, this is evolving more from Freud, but it's that grief stems from this disruption in that attachment bond. We see this in digital mourning through, online communication. It maintains this illusionary proximity. So we are not able to have that detachment in reality. Some of the benefits is it can offer a secure base during that acute grief, right? And this could be by preserving a sense of connection. So for example, listening to a voicemail in that acute grieving process, and even listening to it at 6 months, 12 months, is completely different than if I'm listening to voicemails 10 times every day. Okay, so it's how we're utilizing it to help gradually sever that connection. Some of the risks is it can be quote unquote phantom communication. And so again, that's sending messages to the deceased, and this can really complicate acceptance for some individuals. Have y'all ever known anyone who still texts a number of a deceased one? Yeah. Still texts the number of their deceased loved one. Mhm. And so you have, because again, that iPhone of ours, some individuals, it will have the entire conversation feed that the two of you have ever had. Now, I am someone who deletes those feeds frequently because for my own personal, I don't like to go back and reread conversations. But we can see how in the acute phase, that could be helpful for someone to read the actual words of their loved one. The clinical implication for attachment and loss is that we really need to encourage individuals to recognize that maintaining a connection can be healthy, but integration means reshaping, not erasing the bond. And so again, when we say things like Freud saying that we need to detach from that emotional bond, it's not erasing the bond, but it is reshaping. And where we run the risk with AI and technology is that the reshaping isn't occurring. What's occurring is the continuation. All right, so my professional and personal favorite grief therapy is the dual process model of coping with bereavement. I feel like paints the best picture for what I call adaptive bereavement. In literature, we see frequently the term normal grieving. And I really try very hard not to say the word normal grieving because the person experiencing grief or bereavement, it does not feel normal. Also, it makes individuals feel like if that's not what they're feeling, then they're not normal. And so the terms I use is adaptive and maladaptive and how we cope. And so the dual process model, it views bereavement as having these two realms. We have loss-oriented tasks, and those are like the grief work, the emotional work. That's when someone says that they're flooded with emotions and they just feel, or grief comes in waves. It's a lot of times we acknowledge the loss-oriented sphere as the emotional toll of grief. The other realm is the restoration oriented tasks. Learning which mechanic I have to take my car to, or the smoke detector batteries are out, and that was something my husband always did, and now I have to figure out how to change them. It's the tasks that we shape in life. And so what Strobe says with the dual process model is healthy grieving or adaptive coping occurs when we oscillate or we bounce back and forth between the emotional work and the life responsibilities of grief, and that we need to jump back and forth. That when we spend too much time in the loss-oriented, that emotional work, that we can get stuck and we don't do the responsibilities of life. We don't take on those new roles. We need to be able to oscillate to those responsibilities and tasks because we need a break from the emotional heaviness of grief. We need to be able to say, okay, I'm going to set that aside and focus on work or focus on this task. And so the dual process model is that we oscillate back and in digital mourning. Social media can allow easily switching modes. So you can post a tribute, which would be more loss oriented, acknowledging those emotions. But then you could join a wellness forum, which could be focusing on increasing your diet or exercise, all within the same 5 minutes of being on the internet. And so the benefits of this is it can encourage the normalization of mixed emotional experiences. You know, it's the woman who says, I haven't cried yet, and I feel like I have to. You know, it's okay that you haven't cried yet. That's not a requirement. Or a lady who says, I went back to work 10 days after my husband died because that's what I had to do. Because if I was going to, I couldn't just stay in bed. And so that was her shifting to the restoration side. And so as clinicians, it's what we do is normalize that process and let individuals. Some of the risks that we can see with the dual process model and digital mourning is that the algorithms can really trap users in loss-oriented loops. And so it can be constant exposure to memorial content. It can also be the suggested reels, videos that will then be suggested, whether it's of similar topics, similar hashtags that we put. And so making sure that we're aware that algorithms absolutely play a role. I'm curious after this long presentation, how many of our phones start offering us different targeted ads for platforms that have to do with AI or grieving. They are listening. And so what we really need to do is teach clients to use technology intentionally. All right, so it's journaling or sharing as part of the scheduled grief ritual. All right, it's someone who goes to a graveside on the anniversary of the passing. Steam ritualistic process because maybe they don't live in the same town or that person wasn't buried. And so it still can be this very structured grief ritual, just seeing how we can do it intentionally. And I think that's the biggest challenge because so much about technology and social media becomes we're not thinking intentionally, we're just scrolling, we're just doing. And so making sure that we're mindful in the role it plays. All right, we always have to address the 5 stages of grief. And so as we know, this involves these 5 stages. They're not linear, but this very much remains a popular framework for emotional normalization. So in digital mourning, we can really see online posts reflecting specific stage expressions. So whether that's disbelief, I can't believe this has really happened. This can really normalize emotional fluctuations. You know, social media can someone post that friends, acquaintances, loved ones comment in words of encouragement or words that align with their emotions in that time, which can be supportive. Some of the risks are similar regardless of if 5 stages is being done in digital mourning or not, but it's that stages can always become prescriptive, which leads to a lot of self-judgment. And we see this in bereavement and grief. You know, I should be at acceptance by now, or I shouldn't be feeling joy so soon. You know, it makes us feel like we have to go through each one of these stages. Right, meaning reconstruction. This foundation is really looking at how grief is fundamentally about making sense of loss and really reconstructing meaning and identity. So again, it's reshaping, not erasing. So in digital, we might. In digital mourning, it could be blogging, online journaling, posting stories to help individuals craft narratives. I can't think of the exact book, but there's so many of them. But you can essentially get a book for someone and it sends them a prompt, email prompt every week. And whatever they type in, it then creates like a book, a life book, a legacy book. This is also a phenomenal idea if you have someone like that you're providing services to who has like you can do 30 prompts, you could do one a week for a year. And then they can record their responses or type a response, and then it creates almost like a legacy book. I've always done this in the therapeutic sense as a legacy project for individuals prior to death. But this is something I can absolutely see being created as a legacy project, but then distributed maybe on a timeline. You know, when that individual wants that question to be sent. You know, I think about my mother died when I was young, and before she passed away, she had started this ridiculous Madame Alexander doll collection. And if you know what Madame Alexander dolls are, you do not play with them. They just sit on shelves. And before she passed away, she bought 15 of them. And I got one every Christmas. And when I graduated high school, I got one in a little graduation gown. You know, so now as a middle-aged adult, I have quite a lot of dolls in mint condition, if you happen to know anyone who's interested. At box tissue tag, perfect condition. But that was a legacy project. That was her way of reconstructing meaning after she was gone. So we can absolutely see how in the digital world, this could be very beneficial and a tool that, you know, my mother passed away at an age where we didn't have all the recordings. So outside of a VHS home video, her voice is not something that I have. And so we all know how our senses elicit different memories and responses. For some, it's more sound. For some, it's more smell. And so seeing how just in 35 years, that evolution of how we will be able to remember someone. I think how we also make sure to do this is we incorporate it into the legacy building process as well, because that really will help us hit a lot of the points we've brought up, such as consent, such as how they want their digital footprint to be left, and then how we can disseminate that information. All right, class is continuing bonds. So this is completely contrary to Freud, and this theoretical foundation really views grief as individuals needing to maintain an ongoing relationship with the deceased, and how this can be comforting and a normal process in grieving when it evolves over time. And so in digital memorials, tribute videos, this can exemplify continuing bonds. Something we mentioned is Facebook having memorialized accounts and how that can really institutionalize that bond. It can create a tribute page where people can post, people can view other people's posts. I'm not sure who manages that page. I'm very curious. I'll have to do a deep dive or ask AI to tell me about, because I would hope that it would be like almost giving someone the permission to monitor the page. But does anyone know any tribute memorial pages on Facebook or have any experience? Hmm. Yeah.
Hey.
Okay.
Yeah, and the first, we would have, so we would have to like select that option within our setting. I don't know what happened after that, but I believe he designated a person. And then that person is able to flip the switch from regular Facebook page to the legacy page.
Okay. Yeah.
Um. Very similar to her loss, a friend of mine lost their 17-year-old son and they hadn't, none of that was set up, but she was really comforted by being able to look at his page and then that was hacked and it all went away. So it then created this new loss. It was just really hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really hard.
Absolutely. You know, think about, and these are going to be, we're all going to leave with so many ideas of things we should create in the AI world. But one is, again, like being able to create, whether it's a file or a tangible book, where someone can have that for them, so that when we think of hacking or just internet access, you know, I searched my Gmail for something that I knew was over like 20 years old that I'd sent, and I was just praying I could find it. And it was so disheartening when I realized that it is gone forever, that document. And so finding and seeing what creative ways that we could store the information. And as clinicians, seeing like how we access that information. And that's what makes technology a slippery slope. Because if that's a file on our phone, I can access it in my car. I can access it at work when that grief hits me or that wave is consuming. Versus if it's a tangible book that I do go pull off from the shelf and I do sit down and I intentionally provide space for that grieving and for that healing versus naturally. But for adults, it has to be done intentionally. All right, here we go again. One more survey. Let me make it bigger. I apologize.
Jamie has it on his screen as well, if anyone needs it closer.
It may be better now, so it's. Doing this, I would like to say, as I answer those questions, I'm really feeling my age. I know I should be embracing this, but boy.
Has anyone gone to a presentation where they have interactive polling? I think this is the coolest thing. I just found it. I teach 2 classes a week and I would have done this in that. For so. So this is, I was going to use a site, but this PowerPoint embeds it in it. PowerPoint has an add-on that does it. Yes. So you don't even have to use a third-party website like Slido or something.
It is. It's on your. So when we think about what concerns us most with AI technology, the majority said the disruption of the natural grieving process. We also can absolutely see the commercial exploitation of vulnerable people. We already, all of us know how much, of a business end of life care is in terms of funeral costs and arrangements. One of the best pieces of information I think I learned early on working in hospice is that every funeral home is legally obligated. Let me have one moment. I need to grab my charger. Right. See if we're gonna get technology back. Where is mine? Okay, I do apologize. The question is could you envision circumstances where you might recommend an AI chatbot to a client? About 50% said maybe, but a large percentage said no. Was that an easy question to answer? You felt strongly in your response. So for the maybes, when do you think it could be?
I think that if I had, my son is 6, and if my grandfather passed when I was 8, and if I could, like, just be. Because I. That was maybe.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would be good with that.
Yeah.
I would say that if it worked out, when we tried it, then I would be good with it.
And how we assess which services they're using and exploring what they're planning to get out of that service. So I think that's also very important and can help guide us to see if it's going to be beneficial or harmful.
I said David, because I don't know enough about
Yeah.
it yet.
Mm-hmm.
I would need to know how to use it.
Mm-hmm. And so thinking about just cultural and generational perspectives. And so we do see that many religious traditions, they really view digital resurrection as transgressing sacred boundaries.
Wow.
And that's where um, I mean, some an avatar or truly a visual representation that we could put on virtual reality and like enter a world of our choosing with that individual and have interaction. We also need to think about the economic inequality. And so this is not a service that's accessible to everyone. The use of digital platforms, while social media like Facebook or Instagram might be readily available, a lot of the digital memorials and tribute pages, let me take this off, so sorry. Some of the digital memorial pages and tributes, they still cost money. It's still a subscription. And so thinking about access. Also keeping in mind that as these platforms and services develop, the need for culturally sensitive designs so that we can represent the diverse mourning practices that are different in each culture. All right, some of the critical ethical concerns, again, is privacy and consent is 1% support digital resurrection with consent versus 3% without consent. Do you think that the majority of those digital platforms that live on were consented by the deceased? Mm-hmm. And so again, thinking about just like working with someone who is nearing the end of their life, and honoring their choices, even if it might not align with mine. Making sure that we're carrying that through after their passing. And so making sure that consent is discussed. If a loved one feels like the utilization of that digital footprint would be beneficial for them in the grieving process, discussing that and seeing if their loved one who is dying is okay with it. Some people will be totally fine. And I do think, like Jamie said, as the years move, sound is foreign. And so that does adapt kind of our social construction of how we grieve and how we mourn. We also have memory distortion, right? So I think about how AI trained, it is a formula. So it is going to be gathering data through what that user curated and what they posted. Would you all say that your social media is your authentic self? It depends. It depends. I don't use social media like it would leave a lot of things out. It would focus a lot on like my news and global issues because that's what I use the platforms for. But it would leave a lot of aspects of my authentic self that aren't there. Or I'm not a huge poster of photos. So the digital, you all could probably get a really good laugh at the screenshots that I have saved. But thinking about how it can distort our memory. Or yeah.
I mean, I was just thinking about, in the context of human history, not only AI, of course, but even photographs and audio recordings of voices, incredibly that, you know, in the past, all we had to remember our loved ones was maybe something we made physically or something maybe they planted and our memories. Like there was no other, you couldn't see them again, you couldn't hear them again. So grief has already changed probably radically in the last 100-200 years. Photographs. The difference though with this is like a picture is a real picture. And it was until about 5 years ago. Now we don't. A picture we know someone was down somewhere where they actually were being. A voice recording is a real voice recording, so you know it's them. But trusting the AI to say things in their voice, like I don't know if I would want my daughter to be speaking to a version of me. Isn't me, that isn't going to be saying, and they give her advice or say things that are things that I wouldn't want. I would never say it, you know, and that's a you know, a dangerous thing. To plant words and an identity into our loved ones that isn't there. On the other hand, I would say we have when there's new technology, our smartphones come out, not popular, right? But hey, my friend can talk to his mom all the time. He lost his mom, he can talk to his mom. She's still on to so change and adapt to this.
And I think the person on the receiving end, the real person, our brain, I do not think always makes that connection that it isn't real. And that is that's the dangerous part. Because, you know, those initial stages after we lose someone, it's when you wake up and the first thought in your head is that they're still next to you. Or you get in your car and you go to call mom or dad because that's what you did every day. And it's those moments that can be so painful
it's so necessary in the grieving process that we work through that emotion, that we acknowledge that pain. But if we could just click the button that says dad and call an AI, that is his voice. I worry that that's holding us in that emotion and not allowing us to move through. Mm-hmm.
So what point, before we're talking about today, is gonna look like an antiquated theory, and, that was silly for us to be worried about that, at what point, we, uh, process of breathing in the way that, future psychologists are looking at this, future legal professionals, and, so that, I wonder
How long that'll take?
how long that'll take, and if it will happen. I think it'll go, yeah. It's not gonna take that long.
But will this make grief more public? And is that public in the sense not, will technology allow more conversations about grief, just like we're having, the use of technology? You know, in the past 10 years, the amount of conversations I have about the potential harmful benefits of social media on development every year. How relevant I'm talking about. Where that conversation has evolved from in the beginning, it being terrible, harmful, the worst thing ever. We have also, those views have evolved, and it's not taking away the harm, it's not taking away the potential risks, but it's recognizing the beneficial aspects as well. So I think with the theory and how we conceptualize grief, what's important is that it keeps evolving to see how we as a society do. All right, before we take a break, we're going to listen to, I think it's about 5 or 7 minutes of this podcast. A coworker told me to check it out. And if you listen to This American Life, it was earlier this month, so you might have already heard this. But the author did a project where he created an AI with his voice. Okay, so he created he describes it as a document of data so that it got to know, right? He said that he wrote his biggest secrets, his biggest regrets, things about his life, details, so that it would know them. And then he started having it call people, had it call spam calls and see if they could tell. He would then call his friends and his family. Now, because they knew about his career in researching in AI, a lot of them were able to tell. And I'm going to play a section that really hit me hard because it's the AI version of him calling a friend, and the friend doesn't realize it's it. And so focusing on the real person and his emotional response to this conversation. Okay? Hopefully everyone's going to be able to hear this.
I like to do a complete. What I come to do? When I come to the internet? Yeah, of course, I'm fun. I've been periodically trying my phone out on friends and family, one by one, and explain it to this. Most of the time, even though my phone call is coming from my phone number, I figure out we need this what's going on. Pretty much. I took a little trip to the coast, we did some harbor weather. It was nice and relaxing. How about you? Yeah, I'll say something, it is a fucking robot trying to have conversation. Fuck you, robot. Rude. This is I was getting down to the last couple of times I wanted to stop. I'm gonna call this still. It's starting off one life like the others. I'm prompting my phone to call my friend straight. Got a little chit chat, do some vacation planning. I let him know that a few days before the call, I got a flirting text from Shane that was going around the morning at the same hotel in Dallas as the U.S. men's soccer team, which, as we do a soccer fan, is a guy who will be open to. Those guys are the ones who call getting cut off. It's definitely on my end, which I only about $6. I saw a couple of snippets on social media. I was totally blown away by the whole, maybe the same hotel and the soccer team. But it's going to get, must get insane. Yeah, sorry about all that. This is where things started to go wrong. Chief, I learned later, and misinterpreted the man's slight enthusiasm as me being sarcastic. He told me to start thinking he'd been talking about the trip too much. But perhaps his excitement about this funny coincidence had come off as over the top. And now I was getting in shit for it. Totally understand, one thing. What, if we're going? Yeah, I can imagine that must be really frustrating. So how did you make it, Jeff? Oh, it's fantastic. There's just something about being out in nature that really clears your head, you know? How about you? Have you been on any fun trips lately? Yeah, oh, nice. Where did you go? I was like listening in on this live. The thing that later, if it feels distressed building. I wanted to share it with you, I'm going to share it with you. I'd love to hear about you. Wow, my God, it was what? What do you want to share, Shay? Shay is an infant. If they are looking for the get it, and that really should have done it clear enough to the box, it just wasn't really good. But by now, he's into deep. I thought he was appreciated. I have all my friends didn't want to be appreciated enough. I really appreciate that, Shay. So, what was it? What's that? I'm really touched that you think of me on that show. So, what was it you wanted to share? You went to U.S. soccer team? Yeah, maybe. Amazing. So, yeah. That's awesome to hear. At this point, Jake Whitler told me, you do something very wrong. You listen to what exactly. His mind started turning to crazy possibilities. Kidnapped, drugs, he texted my wife and checked out my well-being. He tried focusing on our upcoming logistics. Would you family love to meet up for the weekend? Okay. What are you guys getting down? We're rolling in front of the right. Perfect. You got so much to catch up on. I was thinking, besides soaking up some sun to the beach, we should definitely get up about it a good day and have a night out. I apologize. Oh, and we can't miss the game on Thursday night, Sunday. That does sound amazing. If you guys the voice agent was making plans for Thursday, saying we wouldn't arrive until Friday. This is when Shay thought perhaps I had time. For how many people would you happen to be? I'm very confused. I get it. The same keys that so often gave away the AI, now only starting to make it a good, someone lost, or broken. I still have trouble listening to this. I'm good trying talking to a machine version of me, believing that I might be a bad one. It tortures me. You really torture them. You doing all right? I'm hanging in there. Okay. Can I help you? Just like you with the cultural Ochsner. I want to get by. All right. I called up Chief Ashford, explained the whole thing to him. He wasn't angry he could do it again. We've been friends for 30+ years. And even in that moment, he's also doing, even though what happened wasn't really fun at all. But for a long time after, still found it profoundly unsettling. We both did. Because he lived in the moment and believed that something was very wrong with somebody he cared about. I reflected that moment. Someone I cared about. Another friend of mine, after I called him the phone, told me that now.
Okay. And so, I apologize for the version. I thought I chose the one with no language on It's an American Life, so I do apologize. We could see or tell in parts where Evan was an AI, like the long pauses, the continued responses. But for whatever reason, his friend didn't pick up on that. Whether he was doing 3 things at one time or whatever the reason is. And that friend reached a place of thinking that Evan wasn't okay. Like maybe it was his mental health. Maybe he was going through like having a quote unquote break. So the emotional response it elicited from the non-AI, because there was a disconnect in tone, in emotion, in conversation, the things that technology can't always capture. And so I think that is, it's an example not tied around grief, but easily we can see how the voice of that individual sounded the same. The pauses, and there weren't any ums or buts, like the real Evan, but his AI was his syntax, his vocabulary. So thinking about where that technology can go in another 5 years or another 10 years. All right. Let me pull back up my PowerPoint. We are going to do a breakout session, but we are going to do a break before so that I can set it up. Jamie, about how many minute break?
How long will it?
10 minutes tops. All right, let's come back at 10:15.
everyone, I need everyone that's on the call to go to the new Zoom link that's in the chat message, please, for the remainder of this event.